Dr. Tom Cowan, welcome to the show. How's it going?
Okay, it's actually Cowan, and thanks
Cowan.
for having me, Matt.
Yeah, I was looking forward to this. I've heard you on plenty of other podcasts throughout the last few years. I feel like making your rounds, and I always found your insights to be interesting. One question I had before we started this, I know it's a little bit of an older book with the vaccines, but in that book you reference Rudolf Steiner quite a bit, and I have actually two shows in a row who both of you guys highly respect. It seems like Rudolf Steiner. So I wanted to ask, what is his importance to you, and why did you reference him in your books?
Okay, so let me say it like this: we're all on a path, right? And the path, hopefully, is to find out as we get older and wiser what is true and what isn't true. And that certainly, in retrospect, seems to be where I've been with my life. And I've also realized, and this will lead into Steiner. So I've also realized that recently that the method that I've been using, although I didn't know it at the time, was to try to figure out what's not true way more than what is true. In fact, that's, I think, the way to understand these days anyways what is actually going on. So, when I was like 20 and in the Peace Corps, and so well, let me say the other thing. Everything I think I've gotten wrong in my life, and there's been a lot of things, and I have a paper trail to prove it that I got things wrong. But everything was one of two reasons. One, laziness. Two, I believed what I was told before I actually knew it for myself. So people say whatever, and I just believed it, and I wouldn't have known how they came about that. So that's a bad mistake, and I try not to make that anymore, but sometimes it's hard because there's so many things in our life, right, that we just take for granted. So anyways, I'm 20 and I believed most of the story, right? We all, we graduated from college and all the cell biology and all the rest of it. And then I read books by Weston Christ and Steiner who said, this isn't the way it is. There's another story here. And that was a huge thing for me because they both made sense as far as I understood them. And it was the first time, I think, even though I had inklings of that before, that I could say they helped me understand that the normal narrative is not the truth. Now, since then, I've learned that they said things, both of them, that I don't consider accurate either. Fair enough, right? Nobody gets everything right. So, in a way, they've both become under scrutiny too. So even though I learned a lot from both of them, I also scrutinize what they say, just as much as anybody else nowadays.
Yeah, interesting. I think that's a kind of a similar evolution. And I don't think we throw the baby out with the bathwater. I generally learn from some people for quite a time. I'm in the world of minerals, and I actually used to be pretty obsessed with like Morley Robbins, and then I kind of scrutinize some things he says, but I do minerals still really kind of, he got me into minerals and changed my
Right.
entire health. And so it's like, I don't, hate the guy. I just kind
Right.
of, challenge some of his ideologies, but he's the person that basically got me into researching minerals, which actually ended up saving my health long term after being chronically ill. So, obviously got some love and respect for him there, but also kind of have some different ideologies in him. So I think that kind of happens as we keep evolving and learning, and we shift a little bit. And
Absolutely.
especially when you're open, some people kind of get into a dogma and get trapped in a box. But if you're always kind of shifting like me, like every couple of years, I kind of look back like, oh, I had all of that wrong. It's like, that's kind of like just my kind of every like 2 to 3 years, I'm like, I had all of that wrong. And I keep just kind of learning and evolving. And so when you do that and you stay open-minded, then you'll begin to scrutinize some of your old mentors, I would say.
Yes, that's exactly what I was saying.
Yeah, and I mean, he seems like, my other buddy like kind of loves him. He had some, back and forth with him too, a little bit about Steiner, and that doesn't, agree with all of it, but, started the Waldorf schools, biodynamic farming, a lot of these things that were basically not talked about in Steiner's time. So I think he was a little bit of a pioneer in that sense.
Yes.
So, he's paving the way. He didn't have all the information like we did at our fingertips either. So, he's just back, probably written books from the library and studying, which is pretty wild. Cool. So, I wanted to talk a little bit about, it's a little bit of an older book, but I think it's kind of relevant in today's just world after 2020. And the, kind of vaccines are just kind of on the move. You got RFK and political. He's trying to, examine vaccines. What are your thoughts around vaccine, childhood autoimmunity? How has that evolved since you've written your book around the vaccines? What's your thoughts process on that?
So when I wrote that book, and this is one of the things that I just referenced a minute ago, even though I had been in this sort of AIDS dissonant community for 25 years, meaning I didn't think there was evidence that HIV caused AIDS. So I was certainly familiar with that. But like all doctors, pretty much, maybe let's say 99%, if you had asked me 7 years ago, and the reason this is relevant because most vaccines are to protect you against a viral disease, right? Like COVID and measles and mumps and chickenpox and rabies, et cetera. If you had asked me 7 years ago, so Tom, you're a medical doctor, right? Trained medical doctor, went to medical school, residency, the whole bit, practiced 35 years. How does a virologist prove the existence of a virus and show that it causes disease, right? You would think that I would know that. It's like if you ask a mechanic, how does a car stop? If he doesn't know that it's because of brakes, you would probably not go to that mechanic, right? Because he doesn't really know what he's talking about. But I would not have known the answer to that. I would not have known how anybody proved there was such a thing as a measles virus, or even proved that there was a disease called measles. And so it's an example of me believing something that I didn't actually understand how they came about that. Now, then you would say, how do, and we can go into that if you want, because now it turns out I do know how they proved the measles virus. And let's just say it's a joke, and I can explain that to you. So then autoimmunity. Now, let me get into that. The definition of autoimmunity is that you have a disease, a specific disease, the cause of which is your body is making an antibody that is attacking your own tissue. That's the definition. Now, if it's, and I often speak with analogies because I think it makes it easier for understand. If I told you, Matthew, that is it matter, Matthew, or does it?
Either one. I'm cool with both.
So I know that hammers knock in nails. And you say, how do you know? Well, I took a hammer and only a hammer, and I hit a nail and it went into the wall. And I said, no, Matthew, I got this. Let's say I got a thing called a slammer. And all you have to do is point it at the nail and a nail goes in the wall. And you say, well, how do you know that thing exists? Easy. I take a toolbox, and I don't know whether it has a slammer in it or not, and I hit the nail with the toolbox, and the nail went in, and that proves they're slammers. I think you would say, that's weird, because that doesn't prove anything. How do you know there's even a slammer in the toolbox? So I looked for one study in the medical literature that showed that you could take an antibody out of somebody who has an autoimmune disease and inject it into a person or an animal, and it would cause disease, right? That's how you would do it. You know how many studies there are like that? Zero, not one in the entire medical scientific literature. In fact, nobody has ever actually even isolated an antibody from anybody's blood. They say they do, but when you actually get into the methodology, that's not an antibody. There is no antibodies. There is no immune system. And I can get into that too. These are all made up concepts. So how did they make it up? They said, I don't know if you want to get into like, how did they prove there was a virus? Because that proves there's an autoimmunity. Should we get into that?
Yeah, go ahead.
So here we are, late 1800s, And a bunch of people like Pasteur and Koch say that diseases are caused by microorganisms that you can't see, right? You got anthrax, and that's a certain disease, and it's caused by this bacteria called anthrax. And so then they start trying to prove that. So they could see an anthrax organism, bacteria, and they would find it in some of the people or animals in that case who had the disease. They also found it in animals who didn't have any symptoms at all, which is weird, right? Because, like, if you go to a place and the houses, 10 houses are blown up, and you see skunks in 3, and then you see skunks in 3 houses that weren't blown up, most people would not say it's the skunks that blew up the houses, but they said it's the anthrax that did it. And so then they said, okay, we isolate the anthrax, right? Take only the anthrax, like only the hammer, give it to healthy animals, and none of them got sick. Think about that for a minute. There has never been a study with bacteria, which you can prove exist, right? You can see them, that has isolated a bacteria and made a healthy person or animal sick. Not one. So anyway, so then they go on and they say, well, there's other diseases they can't find a bacteria, like polio. They have the anterior horn cell part of the spine is degenerated. There's no bacteria there. So they say, well, it must be caused by some organism smaller than a bacteria. And we can't see it because we don't have the technology. Okay? So that's the hypothesis. So how did they prove that? They take somebody who died of paralysis, they have diseased spine, they grind up the spine in a blender with some water and a few chemicals, inject that into the brain of a monkey, and 2 monkeys, one died, one got paralyzed, and they said that proves that polio is caused by an organism smaller than a bacteria. And I read that and I thought, excuse my French, but like, what the like, that's weird, right? Because you don't know what was in that diseased spine. And you don't know, like, maybe monkeys don't like people injecting 10 cc's of spine goop into their brain, right? And that was called the isolation of the polio virus. And that's weird.
That's bizarre.
That is bizarre.
Because, like, even a healthy spine, I'm like, well, what if they just, like you said, like, even if you injected a healthy spine in a monkey's brain, there could be some issues with that. Like, you inject 10 cc's of something in my brain, I might go paralyzed too.
Right. Well, that's a great comment you made, because for 50 years, thousands and thousands of monkeys, that's how they isolated the polio virus. And then in 1953, somebody asked exactly that question. What if we just inject healthy spine into a monkey's brain? And you know what happened?
Same thing.
They got paralyzed. And the guy said, well, that proves that the way we isolated poliovirus not valid. Now, that would have been the end of virology, because that's how they did it. That's how they found viruses. Except in 1954, a guy named John Enders created what's called the viral culture. And to this day, what is it? September 2nd, 2025, this is how all viruses are isolated and therefore found and proven to exist. No exceptions. So here's how they started in 1954. Enders got a child who had allegedly measles, right? Rash, fever, etc. Took some of the mucus, filtered it so that the big stuff was gone, but so you have anything soluble from the mucus, right? And then he inoculated that on monkey kidney cells, growing African green monkey kidney cells called Vero cells. Then he added antibiotics, which are poisonous to kidneys, nephrotoxic antibiotics. Then he took away the food of the culture, and then he added fetal bovine serum, horse serum, and cow serum, and added a few chemicals like trypsin. Okay? Then he waited. 3 days later, the monkey kidney cells died, right? And he says that proves there was a virus in the mucus of the child with measles that killed the monkey kidney cell. And that's called a viral culture. That is called the isolation of the measles virus, or Ebola virus, or HIV, or smallpox, or chickenpox, or monkeypox, or pumpkin pox, or Matthew pox, or any pox you want to name. That is how they isolate the virus.
There is a lot of variables in that. That sounds cool.
No kidding.
I'm trying to wrap my mind around it because I've heard you on other podcasts, but I'm hearing it again and I'm like, hold on. Lots of different cell cultures there, taking away the food, chemical additives, and then once something dies, they just automatically. So they've never actually seen a virus.
Right.
Or what?
Let me just say, in the same paper, and I can read from the paper. I have it right by my desk. He said, I repeated the experiment, except this time I didn't add anything from anybody with measles. Right? Monkey kidney cells, cow serum, horse serum, antibiotics, took away the nutrients. And you know what happened? The cells died in 3 days. And he said it was indistinguishable. And you would think, I'm a doctor, right? I'm supposed to know how to read scientific studies. I would have thought if I did that study, I would have said, this doesn't work. It's because of how you're treating the cells. But he said, no, this is the way you isolate a virus. It was repeated about 4 or 5 times by other researchers in the 50s, and they all said, no, this isn't right because we get the same thing if you do this culture with the antibiotics and horse serum, et cetera, even if you don't add anything. And now we actually repeated this in 2020. Nobody, because then they stopped doing it. And from that day on, every that's called the isolation of the herpes virus. Now, here's where we get into vaccines. What is a vaccine? They take that culture that's broken down, right? Mucus from measles, monkey kidney cells, trypsin, antibiotics, no nutrients, and they put it in and that's called a live viral vaccine. Now, I've asked at which point in that experiment does the virus come into it, right? There's no virus. Well, then they say, well, then we look at under an electron microscope because now they have a tool. They can see these things smaller than a bacteria, right? And they see these little particles. They say, yep, there's the virus. But then somebody does an experiment without the measles, just the monkey kidney cells and all the rest of it. They look at an electron microscope. You know what they see? Same particle.
Same thing.
Same thing.
So I want to ask, so what's the goal then? Is the goal to prove something in order to create a cure, via vaccine or, some intervention, for profit? What's the goal of saying there's a virus that doesn't exist? Like, there's got to be some end mean to it would seem. Like, what's the point?
So here's one way to describe this. So I have this cat named Pumpkin. And when he goes out, he comes and goes out, in and out. When he goes outside, he sits there and looks around and sniffs the air and waggles his ears, looking for, I think, prey, mice and any danger, right? And then when he just sees what he sees, he goes and does whatever he does. What if you told Pumpkin, there's a danger out there and you can't see it, smell it, taste it, nothing? What would he do?
Probably not care because he's a cat, but if you're a human, you might be scared.
Well, Pumpkin, I think, would go and hide under the bed.
Yeah, maybe.
Because he doesn't know if there's something that's going to kill him or not. So he'd be afraid. And if you're a human, you get scared. And then if somebody says, here, you have to, and then he wouldn't eat. because he's scared and he wouldn't come out under the bed. And then his cat friends would tell him, you see, the virus got you. And next thing you know, his whole life is, can somebody protect me against this virus? And so if they say, well, yeah, we're going to inject you with some poison, it's going to make you sick, but don't worry about it because that's your immune system, right? When they said in 1900, they said, if you get exposed to the virus, you get sick, everybody. But then people were exposed to chickenpox or the flu and they didn't get sick, right? You've been exposed to people. So
yeah,
why
it's funny because I know you talk about this in that book too. Like when I grew up in the 90s, I was born in 88. Still vaccines relatively newer. You know, when my cousins had chickenpox, my mom sent me over there. She wanted me to hang out with him for the weekend, and it's funny enough, I didn't get the chickenpox.
Yeah,
and
you
then
didn't get it.
I didn't get it. I stayed there all weekend when we were off school trying to get chickenpox, and I didn't get it. And then I was probably like 14 or something, and I was getting a physical for whatever, and basically told them I never got chickenpox. I tried to get it, and you know what they gave me? A chickenpox vaccine, because they told me if you get chickenpox when you're older, it's deadly or whatever, and I'm like 13 or 14, and my mom knows no better, and I get a chickenpox vaccine.
A chickenpox vaccine is they took a blister with somebody from allegedly chickenpox. I say allegedly, and I can get into that. There's no way to know who has chickenpox and who has measles and who has mumps and who has any of those. And there's no way, and I can prove that to you in a minute if you want. So they put that on a cell culture, it breaks down, they inject you with the cell culture. Now, they had to make an excuse. So science has become what's called post hoc rationalization after another. In other words, you disproved that if you get around somebody with a viral illness, you get sick, because some people don't. So you got to have a reason for that. So they said, well, you have an immune system. So the immune system keeps you from being sick. And that's because you make antibodies, right? So antibodies keep you from being sick from the virus. That's what I learned in medical school, right? You know that, right? You've heard that.
Mm-hmm.
1984, right? Let me say that once more. If you have antibodies, you don't get sick from the virus. 1984, that's the year I graduated medical school. I'm walking down the street on the television. Robert Gallo comes on. He says, we discovered the cause of AIDS. It's HIV. How do we know? Because we found antibodies to HIV in the blood of some people with AIDS. And I was walking with a friend of mine, and I said, wait a minute. I just spent 4 years learning that if you have antibodies, you're immune to the virus. And this guy just told me that if I have antibodies to HIV, the virus is going to kill me. Who changed the rules? And why? I mean, how did this come about? No explanation of how now antibodies mean you're going to die. And a month before, antibodies mean you are immune. And the reality is nobody has seen and purified, isolated an antibody from anybody. It's a mythical concept. And that's what all these things are. They're hypothetical models that have no basis in our actual perceived reality. So the question, let me answer, vaccines can't possibly do you any good. They can't possibly protect you from any disease because the ones against viruses have never been shown to exist. And the ones against bacteria or bacterial toxins, either bacteria exist, but the bacteria have never been shown to be the causative agent in any illness. Therefore, there is no possibility of any benefit from a vaccine. It's only harm. Why do you get so-called autoimmunity? That just means you're chronically sick. And so you make all these chemicals to your body to try to get you well. and we call those autoimmune disease. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And so let's dive into this one. You said can't prove transmission because obviously some people will use COVID as an example, would get COVID and some would not, or they would say you would be asymptomatic, whatever the hell that means, which basically to me means you didn't get COVID really or whatever. But so, like for instance, my wife, she's a personal trainer. We live in Florida. We kind of opened up really quickly. She trained one of her clients. He had COVID. She got COVID. Then I got COVID. But then also you would be around people with COVID and wouldn't get it. So what is the connection where, you are with a loved one or something and you both happen to get sick? What's what's actually happening there?
All right. So let's just go through this very systematically and logically. Well, first of all, with COVID, what's the definition of COVID?
Not me. I don't know the definition of it probably.
Right. Neither does anybody else. I knew you didn't. So there is no way to know whether somebody has COVID, right? There's no virus, so the antibodies are worthless. The PCR tests are worthless because there's no virus. And the symptoms are exactly the same as many other things. So there's no way to know whether somebody has COVID or not. So that's the first problem with that theory. Is we don't have any definition of measles, mumps, chickenpox. In fact, the CDC says, without a molecular diagnostic test, there's no way to know whether somebody has measles, mumps, chickenpox, smallpox, herpes, or any of the other ones. So before 1990, we have no way of knowing who had what, right? Because there was no way. So that's the first thing. The second, so we have trouble doing this study because we don't even have a way to define who has what we're trying to study. Okay, but let's say, so you get sick or you have the flu or something. So you're not seeing transmission. What you're seeing, and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't want to put words in your mouth. What you're seeing is two or more people have similar symptoms, same time, same place. Do you agree with that?
Yeah.
Okay. Then the question, does that mean something was transmitted between those people or animals? So how about this? I put 100 rats in a basement. Somebody puts rat poison. Next day, all rats they bleed to death. Same time, same place, same symptoms. Are you telling me that means they had a transmissible event?
No.
No. So see if you agree. You can't tell whether there was transmission or some common exposure to some, right? You can't tell. Do you agree with that?
I don't know. I'm too stupid to understand to know if you can tell or not, but I just know that, my wife got sick and then I got sick. But so I've tried to just wrap my brain around it.
Right. But you're not too stupid, I can tell you. You cannot tell. You don't know whether she gave you sick or that you were in common with something, right? Just like the rats and a whole lot of other things. So in order to figure that out, you have to do a study. So you take 100 people or 50 people or 10 animals, and you put them in a room with somebody who's got certain set of symptoms, and everything else is the same, right? It's called science. It's called an independent variable. Is the only thing difference is in the one is the same room, same astrological sign, whatever, anything you can think of. One experiment, you put them with sick people, the other you put them with healthy people. And you see if there's transmission. Here's a challenge for anybody listening. There is not one study in the medical literature that proves that actually happens. They've tested it with chickenpox, measles, German measles, the flu, the colds. Daniel Reuters, a friend of mine, wrote a book, 200 studies, Can You Catch a Cold?, showing that there is no evidence for transmission. Now, the interesting thing about that is I've heard hundreds of stories. Yeah, but my wife or Aunt Bessie got sick and then I got sick. All these studies are the independent variable is the sick person, right? And it could be that amongst loved ones, family members, that there is things that are transmitted between people or animals or trees or something. I don't discount that possibility. I know it's not a virus. I know it's not a bacteria, because when they try those, it doesn't work. The virus, they obviously can't try because they can't find one. But a bacteria they've tried, they squirt strep, staph, E. coli, doesn't make you sick. So there is something, people do communicate, and maybe they communicate that now it's time to go through something, and that is possible. How that happens, I mean, I don't know.
So you're saying there's potential for transmission of something. You're just saying that we haven't proved it and we don't know exactly what it is.
If you try to prove it between anonymous people, which is really the way to do it, right? You just 10 people, put them in a room with somebody with the COVID or so-called COVID or the flu or chickenpox. We can't find a study that shows that they have transmission. I mean, here's the thing, Matt. I don't care which way is true. I don't. If there's transmission, fine. If there isn't, fine. I'm only asking. I'm not interested in your Aunt Bessie story or wife story or any of that. If you think that's the way sickness works, it should be easily provable. And up until the 40s, there was hundreds of studies trying to prove this. 1918, a guy named Rossino Public Health Service in Boston, he bribed 100 prisoners, basically told them, if we let you squirt up stuff from somebody who has the Spanish flu into your nose and cough right in your open mouth, right? Somebody with the most contagious event in history, we'll let you out of prison. So they did it. You know how many got sick? 0. And you know what he said, which is why this is so profound, this delusion. He said, we didn't try hard enough to get the people sick. They took mucus and squirted it up their nose. They injected them with blood. They had them talk into their open mouth for 5 minutes, cough in their face. Like, what do they have to do? A lung transplant? Then
especially the Spanish flu. Because you look back at, well, I mean, obviously I wasn't alive, but they portray it as this thing of people were falling over, dying. It was, the Black Plague type of event. Yeah. And if that was happening, that's pretty crazy.
So I'm not saying that people don't get sick, right? I didn't say that. You can make people sick. You can, with Pasteur and his anthrax, he wasn't able to make any animal sick with anthrax. So he used what he called enhanced anthrax, which is he mixed the anthrax spores with arsenic. And then the animals got sick.
Yeah. That'll do it.
And so I'm not saying you can't make people sick. In fact, that is the purpose of vaccines. You inject them with imaginary viruses. That's what's called a live culture. If you want an attenuated viral vaccine, you take that cell culture and you take some of the proteins out of it. And that's called a dead viral culture or an attenuated vaccine. You inject the children with that or the people with that, and you make them sick. And then they have chronic illness. So their ability to go through normal detoxifying events like so-called flus and colds and measles, where, you get stuff in you from breathing or metabolism or whatever, and then you flush it out, right? That's called healthy, normal detoxification. That's what childhood illnesses are. So by giving somebody a vaccine, you essentially disable that system. And so instead of being able to get the mucus and the bad stuff out, they keep it in, and then they get asthma and leukemia and ADD, so-called, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I'm glad you touched on that because I think there's a strong argument. My child is turning 1 this month, and I didn't give him any vaccines. Just caveats, obviously, clearly I'm not with the vaccines either. But I think there's a strong argument, especially you even talked about it in your book, but I've read it other places. Lots of people have talked about when you get the chicken pox and the measles and whatever like label you want to slap on these kind of normal illnesses that people get, the flu over time, especially when you're an early child, that it does actually promote greater health long term. So there's like an argument that you're actually supposed to get the fever, get the mumps, get the measles, and you're just supposed to detoxify, like you're saying, come through that and kind of build up your robust system so that you can come in contact with whatever pathogens or whatever we are actually experiencing.
Yeah, well, there's no pathogens, but everything else you said is right. And this is not new. This was Hippocrates said, 2,500 years ago, give me a medicine to produce a fever and I can cure any disease. Now, this is obvious. You get a splinter in your finger, you make pus. The pus is the therapy for the splinter. It's not an infection. And then you breathe in debris, there's all kinds of debris that's spraying in the air, et cetera. And then you get mucus and a cough to get it out, right? And the doctors who don't understand how the human being works say, you have bronchitis caused by a bacteria. No, you have get chemtrail debris out of your lungs situation. That's what you have. And if you stop the person from doing that every year for 20 years, then they end up with chronic lung disease or a tumor in their lung, which is a bag of debris which you stop them from getting out. And that's exactly where we're at.
That's super interesting because what I do in my practice is I use HTMA, and I'm basically focused on heavy metal detoxification. And one of the main things that happened probably the first year on my program, maybe even a little longer, was I would just cough up tons of mucus. Like as I removed those toxins, it was just like phlegm after phlegm. Like I would cough it up all day some days while I was going through those heavy metal eliminations, which basically meant that my body was shut down and wasn't able to probably clear that mucus for quite some time.
Yes. So then when you do things to help you get better, then your body can start to do an elimination process. Your body is ingenious, so it makes, that these metals and toxins and poisons are stored in the tissues. So it makes a lubricant and a fluid to help flush it out. We call that mucus. And if it's nasty smelling and nasty colored, that's because there's nasty stuff in there, right?
It
It's
definitely
not,
was. It
yeah.
wasn't. It
And
wasn't
so that's how
pretty.
you get it out, and then you better. And your whole being is better. Your actual situation in life is better. Whereas if you had gone and stopped that from coming out, right, with antibiotics and cough suppressants, you would be worse.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
simple. This is not like rocket science.
I'm under the impression, I don't know if I'm the smartest guy in the health space, definitely not, but I'm under the impression that these heavy metals and these plastics and molds and things are the root cause of basically everything. And if we clear those out of the way, we can handle any of these, whatever they're trying to throw around, flus and COVIDs and all these stupid names. I think it's more the environmental toxins that people have built up. I've yet to find a client from high-level biohacking podcast people down to the average Joe who doesn't release tons of heavy metals on my program. It's quite bizarre.
Right. I mean, you can even go in a way deeper than that. Like if you talk about molds, fungus is there to bioremediate you. If you have stuff in you that you can't eliminate, you generate bacteria and fungus to help bioremediate, essentially biodigest the toxin and the dead and dying cells. It's the same with parasites. Parasites are not causative agent of disease. They're there. Well, a lot of parasites don't exist. They're microscopic artifact. But like people who get worms, the worms are eating dead and dying tissue, particularly in your intestines. And so how do I know that? Everybody should ask, oh, this guy sounds, he sounds all confident. It's very simple. If you say worms or mold cause disease, you should be able to isolate the worm, right? Which you can. So I have a vial of only worms. I have people swallow it or animals and see if they get sick. It's simple. And you know what happens? They don't get sick. And interestingly, the people with like ulcerative colitis, bleeding in their bowels, if you have them swallow worms, you know what happens? They get better.
I was just about to say that there are certain therapies where people are actually taking these worms and getting
Yes.
better.
Right. What is it doing? They're not, it's the world is not out to kill you. That's the take home message, that the world and your body are there to help you heal, except if you stop it. And that's the problem. So they're there to clean up dead and dying tissue, just like they're there to do that in the woods. You don't go cut a tree and let it sit there and it gets fungus and say, oh, the tree has an infection, right? The molds and the bacteria and all the other organisms are bioremediating, getting rid of dead and dying tissue. That's what they do in us.
Interesting. Yeah, I actually just had a mold exposure with my son. I mean, I don't know how this translates, but he was having some breath holding spells, like where he's kind of holding his breath for 5 seconds and kind of slightly going unconscious. And I did a mold test, and there was a slight roof leak, and his nursery was the only place that actually showed the high level of toxic mold. And we pulled his crib and cleaned everything in ozone and got him into our room, and he hasn't done it a single time since. But also I got his first hair test back, and he had some elevated heavy metals that probably came from mom, obviously. So I don't know if there was two things playing against him all at once, but also definitely since I took him out of there, he hasn't had one breath holding spell. I don't know if that was random or if that mold was really affecting him. He's also, we know, 11 months old, so he's very young.
The other part of that story is, I'm sure you've heard this and know this, but most houses are basically made of toxic chemicals.
Yeah.
Right?
I agree.
They're not made of wood and natural. They're basically glue and poisons mixed together. And so what's happening with when people say it's the mold is volatilizing these chemicals. And then the people are breathing in the chemicals. Now, again, how do I know that? Because it's easy to sort out. You take just the mold and you squirt it in somebody and nothing happens. It's not the mold.
I agree. I think that they say, I've had plenty of mold people on my show because I did live in a mold prior to this one. I lived in a moldy house some years ago, and that's when I first really got sick. But I had tons of parasites and heavy metal. I had a lot going on, Lyme. I had everything. But, they talk about things like the Amish, like the way the Amish build and the stuff that they use, and they let some air circulate through on their barns and things like that. And they don't have any issues with water damage and growing mold at all. So I think we've turned away from just build it. We want everything to be cheap and convenient. How fast can we get it up? How much money can we make on the house, instead of actually focusing on the quality materials of the actual living space?
Yeah. And, I'm also aware that I'm not sure I answered your earlier question. What is the gain from the virus narrative? The gain is control.
I was about to say fear and control.
Fear and control. Because just look what happened with COVID. They closed your business, ruined your family. I could go on and on over an imaginary virus, a virus that was isolated, right? Found by taking one person with pneumonia, putting it on a cell culture. The cell culture dies. They say they isolated COVID, the bacteria, the virus that caused COVID. That's scientific nonsense. And all this thing with, we could go into, well, what about the genome and what about PCR? If you've never had a thing, how do you know that a piece of it came from that thing, right? If I tell you, Matt, I found this unicorn out in my woods, you say, how do you know that? Well, I found a toenail. Now, you might ask me, because I know how smart you are, did you make sure the toenail came from that unicorn? No. Why not? Because I've never seen the unicorn. But I know I saw a toenail. Did that toenail could have come from somebody else, some other animal? Well, yeah, it turns out all those sequences that they call SARS-CoV-2 are part of humans and bacteria and other organisms that are actually real. It's literally a scientific joke. And that allowed them to make a lot of money, control the world, control the political environment, everything. It's tyranny. It's pure badass tyranny.
And I have an interesting question on that then. So what are we funding when people are trying to expose these Wuhan labs, the labs in Ukraine? All of our tax dollars are being funded over for gain of function. What are they actually doing in those labs then?
Right. So once you start getting into how do you run a scam, you realize that the best way is you have to have a narrative and a counter narrative, right? You have to have the freedom people saying, no, we caught them red-handed. They're doing gain of function on these viruses and weaponizing them, and they're out to get us. So that becomes the alternative narrative. But what's common to both of them is it's all about the virus and you should be scared. In fact, if it was a engineered virus to kill us, arguably you should be more scared than if it was just a normal virus, right? So in other words, if these freedom people, the Kennedy and Mercola and all these didn't do what they're doing, they would have invented them. Now, to your question, what are they doing? They take cell cultures, they put in some alleged sequences, some chemicals, and they derive new sequences in the cell culture because they put new sequences in, and they claim that that's a engineered virus. It's nothing. It's just a new sequence in a cell culture. So that's one thing they're doing. But I think that the real thing they're doing is laundering money.
I mean, we've seen that a lot with, love or hate the political spectrum. I think everyone's got an opinion on it right now. But with the Doge cuts, you kind of started to open. I mean, everyone knew it was corrupt. But then when you started seeing like this many amounts of millions went to this thing and that thing, it was pretty eye-opening to just, from a, pretty much a libertarian type of guy, just paying attention to where our tax dollars are going. You started to realize like it was pretty much all a money laundering scheme.
Yeah. And so it's mostly that, but when people say, well, what are they doing? They actually publish what they're doing. You can read. They take cell cultures, they put in some sequences, and they get new sequences because they put in new ones, and they call that a new virus or an engineered virus. Now, what's so interesting about SARS-CoV-2 is they did it in a way to deliberately get caught. In other words, they had this guy, so they do a cell culture, and the way they do sequencing is so you get this cell culture and it breaks down, and there's all this 56 million pieces of RNA, right? So they throw out the ones they say are human, which they don't really know, but they say that. And then they put it into a computer and they say, give me the sequence of the virus. That's like giving somebody's 56 million words and saying, give me War and Peace. And the people would say, well, can I see War and Peace first? Because how do I know if I'm right? Oh, you can't see War and Peace first. You have to give me the sequence of these words that equals War and Peace. So the computer gives them 1.2 million possibilities, right? And they choose the longest one. And that's the SARS-CoV-2 genome. Now, in that genome, which they then published, they inserted at a certain point a sequence that had been part of the published sequence of HIV. Now, any virologist looking at that sequence would say, hey, wait a minute, that couldn't possibly be right. Because it's like you're reading War and Peace and it says it was the best of times and the worst of times. And if you're an English person, you say, that doesn't belong in that book. So anybody looking at that would immediately notice that that couldn't have been, part of that sequence. Somebody inserted it in. That's why that became the lab leak story. Now, interestingly, you would think the question that people would ask, and this gets a little complicated, is, okay, let's run this data again and see if we get the sequence with the HIV sequence in it. That's what they say is there. Nobody did that. We did it and proved that the sequence with the HIV sequence is not in the original data information, meaning they put it in manually afterwards in order to be caught.
Why do they want to get caught?
So that there'd be these two narratives. It's either a natural virus or an engineered virus. And so then they leaked this. So Kennedy and Mercola and Malone and Cole, they all pick it up. We caught them red-handed. Not one of them said, run the data again and see if you can get that sequence. And if they had because we did that, you cannot get that sequence, which means they put it in deliberately to be caught. Why? To be caught so that there would be this two possible narratives. Natural virus, engineered virus. It's still a virus. We don't have to listen. So the alternative people, the people who are catching them red-handed, are not going to say, there's no virus. This is all bullshit. They're going to say, yeah, we caught them making an engineered virus, and then we can stop this whole thing by stopping the funding for engineered virus. And it's a big joke.
So with the point of that, back to, what is the end goal? To keep us kind of distracted, arguing online, going on podcasts, trying to speak our truth about whether it's engineered or not, so we're focused on something bigger at play, most likely?
Yes. So there's 4 years, Rand Paul and Ron Johnson, we caught them red-handed, and we're going to stop this funding and get rid of these engineered viruses. There's no engineered virus. That sequence doesn't exist. It's not even in the data. And if you had any scientific integrity at all, you would have done just what we did. We ran the data again. You can't get that sequence.
So there's no possible way to get the sequence of
no possible
SARS-CoV.
way. Somebody put it in there deliberately afterwards in order so that any virologist would catch it. And it would become the alternative narrative, and it would keep the virus story going. So idiots like Cowan and Coffman, nobody's going to listen to them because they didn't catch them red-handed.
That's
manipulating
interesting.
us. It's brilliant. And like I said, if these people didn't exist to do this story, they would have had to invent them because it was a perfect ploy to keep the story going.
Yeah, I mean, I was under the impression that I thought it was very political. I wasn't a big Trumper guy or anything. I just thought that they wanted to get him out of there. He wasn't doing exactly what they wanted, and they like to do mail-in ballots, and obviously I think that they probably wanted it to go even further than what it did. They probably wanted us to be locked down for the next decade and tell us that we have, no natural immunity and all these things. I think that they wanted that thing to push further, and some of us kind of just pushed back on it. And, I beat whatever they call COVID.
There's no natural immunity. Can't. It's like, the thinking of that, it's like somebody coming and saying, I know why all the houses on this block are exploded because of invisible exploding unicorns. And my house didn't get blown up because I spread unicorn repellent up.
Some people think it was like they were, they put up the 5G towers and stuff. Are you in tinfoil hat enough to go? Like, do you think 5G had anything to do? And they were kind of doing frequencies. I know Dr. Group's big into this. There's a few people. I haven't studied it enough. Do you think that they were playing around with 5G and that was actually causing symptoms?
There's no doubt that man-made electromagnetic frequencies, not just 5G, but anything, radio waves, Wi-Fi, 3G, all that causes disease. We are biologically meant to experience a wide range of less intense frequencies from the sun and the moon and the earth and animals and people and our children and plants and walking barefoot on the earth and being out in the sun. And anytime you put more and more intense high intensity single frequency waves, you're going to cause trouble. So, if you say was 5G the cause of COVID, well, you know what COVID means? COVID is not a disease. It means see, right? See, like look, see the ovid. You know what an ovid is?
No.
Sheep.
Ovid means sheep.
Ovid means sheep.
No
See the
fucking
ovid.
way. I got to look that up. I'd never heard that. That's crazy.
That is crazy. So, is there a disease called COVID? Yes. It means people behaving like sheep. Did 5G cause people to behave like sheep? No. Does 5G cause people to be sick? Yes, sometimes.
Yeah, I think the thought process was that, a lot of people were catching them installing these kind of hidden 5G towers during the lockdown, and then they could technically, the argument would be they could ramp up those frequencies in certain areas and kind of make it look like the COVID was spreading, but really they were targeting specific areas with frequencies, and everybody was kind of getting ill and detoxing and not feeling right from the actual frequencies that they had just put up because they had just installed these brand new 5G towers during the lockdown. So definitely some interesting thought process around that for sure.
There is some truth in that. And there's hundreds of studies showing the deleterious effect of high intensity single frequency wavelengths. Hundreds.
Yeah. I mean, I before 5G, I was like big into trying to block as many EMFs and stuff as I can. I live in the city, so it's a lot tougher, but buying devices and using things and trying to do my best because, and then 5G obviously ramped it up a notch. And I actually find that my clients who have more heavy metals and stuff are actually react to those frequencies a lot more than once I detox them for a while. Yeah, once I detox them for a couple of years, they generally don't have any of that EMF kind of sensitivity. I'm not saying it's perfect with 5G and everything. Probably still causes some biological shifts on you, but it's a lot worse when you are that antenna. And maybe that's one of the reasons they're spraying it in the sky. The aluminum on my hair test, every client, it's insane. Even if you've been detoxing for a while, they're just crazy aluminum always coming out on the hair test.
Yeah. That's also vaccines.
Yeah, plenty. That's one of the people don't understand the vaccine, especially when you're giving them to kids at a young age. The absorption rate's like 100%. They don't have, it's injected into the bloodstream, so it's going to absorb 100% because when you eat food, you actually can process some of those metals and maybe excrete them. But when you inject them into the bloodstream, you're going to absorb 100%. And little kids who don't have a developed blood-brain barrier, well, a lot of that can just move right into the brain easier than if an adult were to come into contact with some of those same exposures. So I think that's one of the links to autism and a lot of these like childhood diseases.
Except, Matt, I hate to say it, but there is no blood-brain barrier.
You don't think so?
No. If you think there is, why do I say that? Because I say a lot of things and people would say, how does he know that? So I went looking. A blood-brain barrier means that there is an anatomical barrier between the blood and the brain, right? So I looked at a biopsy of a blood-brain interface, blood-liver interface, blood-heart interface, exactly the same. There is no barrier. Nobody has ever shown me a piece of cellophane or a barrier or anything you could call a barrier between the blood and the brain. Now, to be clear, that doesn't mean that some things don't get absorbed into the brain more than the liver or the heart or the spleen, because the brain is, a higher concentration of water, for instance, than your heart is. And so something that's water soluble or polar will get absorbed into the brain tissue faster than it will into the, say, liver or heart. But there's no barrier. What's happening here is we've forgotten that the way we look for things determines what we see. And so most of the things that we see, don't understand how you got that picture. Like, let me give you an example. One of the hallmarks of modern science, genetics, is ribosomes, right? That's the place. It's very important to this whole story because it's a place where mRNA is translated, i.e., made into protein, right? So you get these little things in the cytoplasm, and it's very important to the story because without ribosomes, and people do all kinds of things about ribosomes, et cetera. Now, you can't see ribosomes on a light microscope. You can only see them on an electron microscope. And in order to get the picture, you have to take some tissue and you have to put it in a blender and macerate it. And then you freeze it to like 150 degrees below zero. And then you put some stains on it and dehydrate it, et cetera. And then you can get a picture of it. And so when I ask people, well, how do you know all those things, the freezing and the staining and the macerating, don't change what you're seeing, right? They don't know. Now, here's what's interesting. Every single picture of a ribosome is a perfect circle. If it's a perfect circle on a picture, that means it's a sphere in real life, right? Now, what are the chances you took an orange and you put it in a blender and you froze it and you stained it, and every piece of the orange would be a perfect circle?
Not likely.
0. Right?
Right.
So there's no way that perfect circle was there in real life. No chance. And then a guy named Harold Hillman, who was the only really good biologist in the 20th century, did the whole experiment to get ribosomes, except he started with tissue that couldn't possibly have ribosomes, and he got the same picture. And he said, these are gas bubble artifacts from freezing, drying, dehydrating, staining, etc. So there are no ribosomes. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. So we're talking about where the protein, the substance of a living being is made, right? Proteins. You know what ribosome means? Rib, right? R-I-B. O, that means of. Soma. You know what a soma is?
Drawing a blank on it. Been a while since I've done
Soma
biology research.
Soma is body. Somatic.
Somatics.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So rib of the body. That's where the human being is made. Have you ever heard that before? That the human being is made from the rib of the body?
No, I've never heard that.
Yeah, Eve.
Oh, well, yeah. Biblical. Yeah.
So in the Bible, it says the woman was made from the rib of the body of man. So these clowns mock this and say, yeah, that's right. We're going to call it ribosome. So it's the rib of the body. That's where it's made. Joke's on you.
So what's left? What exists? Anything?
Yeah, we're made up of tissues with organized water, crystalline structured water that have nuclei and mitochondria, and that's it.
Interesting.
And the way that, these things, the water acts like the memory and the antenna. And so if you disorganize the water by like putting toxins in or by, EMFs, you disorganize the water and then you can't receive impulses correctly. Now, the body wants to remediate that. So it uses warmth to dissolve the gel, right? It's brilliant. And that causes mucus or discharge, which then flows out, and that's how we detoxify. And then you form a more perfect gel. And that explains, Matt, everything you're doing, everything with Gerson diet. You've got poisons in your gel. You can't download information properly. And, we have this clinic, the New Biology Clinic, and essentially that is the philosophy that we treat people based on the reality of what exists. Ribosome, endoplasmic reticulum It's these layers they see. And you get the same layer when you freeze water, you get these fracture lines. Those are artifacts. Then they say you make the DNA is in the nucleus, and each segment called a gene makes a protein, right? You've heard that. And then they find out there's 100,000 proteins, 20,000 genes. I guess geneticists aren't good at arithmetic, because where's the other 80,000 codes? It's nonsense.
So we're just water, nuclei, and mitochondria. It's a lot more basic than what we led to believe.
And there's no cell membrane receptors. There's no opiate receptors or no serotonin receptors. And again, if you don't believe me, and I don't expect anybody, show me the study where they show the receptors in the cell membrane. I happen to know it doesn't exist. All they know is that certain things bind more avidly than others. Well, I know that, right? Certain chemicals have stronger effects than others. I also know that anybody, I didn't take LSD, but people who took LSD know that certain chemicals have strong effects. That doesn't mean we have LSD receptors that have been there for 20 million years just waiting for somebody to invent LSD. I mean, this is nonsense.
I was just about to ask, because I'm like, so what is, like, if someone's hooked on opiates, what is going on? It's just the chemical itself.
The chemicals have effects. I'm not saying chemicals don't have effects. I'm talking about the mechanism of opiate receptors. Somebody's going to have to show me a receptor in a cell membrane, and that's the effect. No, the guy named Gilbert Ling did this with sodium-potassium pump. It's one of the most important parts of modern cell biology. It's in the membrane. It determines sodium, potassium inside and outside, which causes the cell to be charged. So he did a very simple experiment. He stripped the membrane off the tissue where the pump is, and he got the exact same concentration of sodium and potassium.
That's interesting. I don't know if that exists, but that was kind of one of the questions that I had if we had time to get to it, because on the hair test, we actually look at the sodium to potassium ratio, as we call it the vitality ratio, and I find that it's very important, but we don't use sodium and potassium per se. Like, we'll use zinc to lower sodium and raise potassium. So we use minerals and different nutrients. And I do find that the closer that they get to Dr. Paul Eck's ratio of 2.5, the better they feel. I'm not saying that proves that there's a pump. Maybe it's just more of a relational, you don't want one too high in comparison to the other or one too low.
Right. Just to be clear, I'm not talking about that sodium isn't important or potassium isn't important or the ratio isn't important. I didn't say that, right?
Right. You're just saying the pump itself.
That the mechanism of distribution of those is because of a mechanical pump, and that has never been proven. And, at the end of the day, Matt, what I'm really talking about here, again, we get into sort of mockery. There's two atomic theories here at work. There's atom and atom. So the first atom was ADAM atom, and all of us are descendants from ADAM atom. In other words, from a creative, energetic principle in the world. Some people call it God, right? And everything around us, everything in our world is an act of conscious creation in an electromagnetic field. And then there's another atom, ATOM, which I think is a mockery of the first atom, which is, no, all that's BS. All you got is these billiard balls, and they bang against each other randomly, and then they form a molecule. And then they keep banging over millions and millions of years, and then you get a big chemical. And they keep banging, and then you get a bacteria. And they keep banging and banging around in random things, and then you get a frog, and then you get a giraffe, and then you get a gorilla, and then you get Uncle Harry. None of it means anything. It's all random banging together of inanimate stuff. And you say, well, how come Uncle Harry can think and ask questions? How does a random collection of molecules that has no meaning, no purpose, no creator, nothing. It's just banging random collect. How does it ask, like, what am I doing here? Yeah. Well, those are emanations from your brain. You know, you get the brain, it bounces around, and then you get a thought like, what am I doing here? That's what we're told. And all molecules are hypothetical, right? You've never seen a molecule.
Definitely not.
Definitely not. You've never seen pumps. You've never seen ribosomes. You've never seen a virus. You're like Pumpkin hiding under the bed saying, what the hell is going on? Because I don't get this stuff. And that's not how healthy people live. They live based on getting their experience to be stronger and stronger as they live. I know because I experience the world. Here's what happens when I don't move, when I eat crappy food, when I sit in front of a computer. You don't need somebody to tell you what to do.
I agree.
There you go. It's all because we believe in ATOMs. It's all nonsense. Random collection of nothing.
All
Now
right.
great.
Well, that was awesome. I think we should actually probably leave it on that. I do want to give you a few minutes to tell people about any of the books you want to. You also have a lot of great products. If anybody's like sensitive to oxalates, I know you have this low oxalate green powder. You do some of the farming. So for the last few minutes here, if you want to tell people about your products or where to find your books and all of that, go ahead and go through that.
So the main website is drtomcowan.com. And, you know, one of the main things we have a food website, which is Dr. Cowan's Garden. And we have more of a supplement website, which is Dr. Tom Cowan. And we also have what's really exciting is a new biology clinic. And it's newbiologyclinic.com. And there we're collecting practitioners who understand this new way of thinking and understand that healing is about getting out of the way of this amazing, magnificent body that we have, clearing out emotional, psychological, physical toxins that have interfered with us finding our meaning and purpose in life, really. And our medicine is based in reality, not, you know, when you go to a doctor, they're treating you based on disproven theories. That's really what it amounts to. So I would really encourage anybody who's interested in, you know, recovering their health to check out New Biology Clinic. That's really where it's happening. And I think we're doing something that's not being done anywhere else, because we're really asking, you know, is there such a thing as autoimmune disease? Or what is this? Why do people get sick? Like, what's happening? And why they get sick then leads to how to get them better.
Awesome. Is there already a website up for the New Biology Clinic and everything?
Yes.
Cool. So I will link to all of those in the show notes as well for people to check out.
Great.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on. Also, he's got tons of books, Audible, wherever you can find them. I think he got it like 10 of them out. I'm not sure exactly how many, but there's quite a few. Anymore. Awesome. Well, stick around while I close out the show. Thanks so much.
Okay.